Turn on your projectors and follow me down the rabbit hole. JJ Hatter welcomes you to Analysis in Wonderland. Today's topic, the top 20 versions of the Queen of Hearts, Part 2. Oh, I've been really looking forward to today's episode, everyone. For those who came in late, this is the second half of a countdown covering my top 20 favorite takes on the Queen of Hearts, from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, as the title implies. This list has covered and will be covering various interpretations of the Crimson Tyrant, from theatrical movies, television, printed books, interactive games, and stage productions. If you want to get better context, go and see Part 1, which should be linked at the end of this video or in the description box. That one covers choices 11 through 20. With that said, for everybody else, I don't want to take up any more time. You know the drill. So let's get started. We don't want to keep Her Majesty waiting. That usually leaves one reduced by a head. These are my top 10 favorite versions of the Queen of Hearts. Number 10. Flora Robson from the 1972 film. The 1972 film is another in a long line of Alice movies, some of which we've already talked about, and a few more are on the way, which boast an all-star cast of major celebrities, up-and-coming performers of the time, and particularly noteworthy character actors to play the roles of the Wonderland figures. Out of all such attempts, this one is the best in my opinion, and one of my personal favorite Wonderland movies in general. Dame Flora Robson's turn as the Queen was one of her last roles in film, and honestly, it was a pretty perfect casting choice. She had played multiple regal figures across her career by this point, including two separate turns as Queen Elizabeth I in the films Fire Over England and The Seahawk many years before. Who else was better to tackle one of literature's most infamous evil queens? Robson's Queen is wonderful in that she has this sense of grandiose authority to her, but still somehow manages to capture the Queen's childish nature. She's not a raging, roaring monster most of the time, but instead a snappy and strict figure who demands command. Yet she always seems to be sort of sulking and grumping at the same time, like a pouting, spoiled brat. I love the contrast and how it's handled. It's somehow both subtle and yet clear as day. If you had asked me several years ago, I actually probably would have named Robson as one of my top 3 versions of the character. I no longer feel quite that strongly about her now, but I do still feel she's worthy of a place in my personal top 10. Number 9. Riddle Rosehearts from Twisted Wonderland. This is one of the reasons I was so excited to get to this section today. Twisted Wonderland is a mobile game first released in 2020 in Japan. It has been adapted since into a manga, a light novel series, and even more recently into an anime. It was created by Yana Toboso, most famous for the unrelated franchise Black Butler. The game focuses on a protagonist from our quote-unquote real world getting transported to a parallel world, where they live and study at a school of black magic called Night Raven College. The college is founded on the principles of 7 famous Disney villains. During their stay, the protagonist encounters various odd characters, many of whom are inspired by or even related to these villains. Think of it as Descendants, but way better. The Queen of Hearts is one of the great 7 who inspired the school, and Riddle Rosehearts is the character analogous to her. Riddle is the house warden of Heartslebule, the Wonderland-themed dorm of NRC. Raised by a very controlling mother, Riddle is obsessed with making sure every single rule of his dorm is followed to the letter, and stands absolutely no nonsense. This is ironic because many of the Queen of Hearts' rules are, as you might guess, quite bizarre in nature, and some seem to have no point at all. It's indicated Riddle's extremely rigid upbringing has drilled into him a sense of pride and the need to follow rules religiously, but it's also denied him the chance to enjoy things he genuinely loves and have more friends. As the plot goes on, Riddle does learn to loosen up a little, but remains a stern taskmaster. No, not that taskmaster. Not that taskmaster either, get back on track! Anyway, most of the major characters in this universe have a special ability referred to as unique magic, or a signature spell, depending on translation. Riddle's unique ability is fittingly called Off With Your Head, and allows him to place a magic-suppressing collar around the neck of anyone he chooses. thankfully far less gruesome than his source inspiration, but still effective in ensuring he and his temper are a force to be reckoned with in a magical world. I've been in love with Twisted Wonderland since the game first came out. I'm amused by how thoroughly bonkers its lore and mere premise are, and I genuinely think a lot of the characters are really fun and interesting. Riddle is no exception. He's actually a member of the cast I've come to like more and more over time, and I have no hesitation whatsoever placing him here in my top 10. In the original Japanese version of the game and subsequent spin-offs, the character was played by Natsuki Hine. In the English dub of the anime adaptation, Riddle is voiced by Paul Castro Jr. Both performers are amazing. Number 8. Annie Long from American McGee's Alice. As I've said before, American McGee's Alice basically set the standard for the idea of a dark and twisted wonderland. No, we already talked about that one, let's move on. It also set the standard for a lot of tropes and story points for other reimaginings in general. The plot of the first game focuses on an older Alice returning to Wonderland in order to save it from the Queen's ever-worsening tyranny. That pretty much sums up the plot of a lot of other reinventions of the story one could name nowadays. What primarily makes this queen different from many of the later versions of the character that would appear is the specific way she's set up. The queen in the first game is less of a straightforward villain and more of a sort of corrupting influence, transforming Wonderland into an ever more disturbing place. This is represented by the queen's Cthulhu-like tentacles, which seem to sprout all over Wonderland. The closer you get to the literal heart of darkness, the more of these slimy, fleshy things you'll find spearing through the ground. Her castle itself seems to be made largely of tentacles and flesh once you reach it. Her true form is a hideous beast that represents Alice's dark side, following the trauma of the fire that destroyed her family. The queen is all her guilt, all her fear, all her anger, all her ever-looming madness condensed down into one monstrous entity, one that needs to be confronted in order to save the world. In the second game, the queen's role is both larger and smaller at the same time. She now has more lines and more direct interaction with Alice, whereas in the first game it was all about just reaching her and finally facing her. However, her impact on both the story and the world itself have been diminished. Her realm is now quite literally a desiccated husk of itself, with her nestled away in the center of it all in a labyrinth of tentacles and gory filth. She now has a new look as well, resembling a nightmarish version of a young lady. Some sources claim a younger version of Alice herself, while others claim it's meant to be her sister Lizzie. Neither would surprise me, and I'm not sure which has been confirmed as true. Makeover notwithstanding, this new queen is helpless to do little more than bide her time and hope she can survive the schemes of the second game's main villain, the Dollmaker, to destroy Wonderland completely. In both games, the character was voiced by Annie Long, and in both games, special effects were added to Long's performance to intensify its otherworldly power. In Game 1, the Queen's voice steadily changes from a relatively normal one to a more demonic, monstrous roar. In Game 2, her voice keeps shifting pitch and tonal quality, so that at some point she sounds like a small girl, and at others she sounds like an aged crone, as well as everything else in between. Both add to the horror of this queen's fittingly scary presence. Number 7. Miranda Richardson, from the 1999 Hallmark TV movie. Richardson's queen is one I've come to love more and more over time, and is another case of absolutely perfect casting. From Queenie in Blackadder to the evil queen in Snow White, fairest of them all, she's had more than her fair share of character turns who seem Queen of Hearts-esque, so to speak. Much like in the later Royal Ballet production, which I spoke of in Part 1, Richardson first appears in a real-world scene at the start of the story, as a snooty guest at a garden party Alice's family is hosting. This role, however, is very minor. The main focus is on her as the Queen of Hearts, and there she shines like gold. I absolutely love the costume and makeup for her take on the Queen. It's one of my absolute favorite designs for the character, if not my favorite, at least in terms of screen depictions. I also love all the back and forth banter she has with the King and Knave of Hearts, played by Simon Russell Beale and Jason Fleming respectively. I will admit that the extremely high-pitched, exaggerated voice she affects for the character does get a little grating at times, but I think that's sort of the point. And as time goes on, I do find myself appreciating her performance a lot more. At this point, I'm pretty sure it's one of my favorite roles from Richardson, top 3 easily, and she's arguably one of the most iconic takes on the character out there. All in all, more than deserving of a mention in my top 10. Number 6, Armelia McQueen from Adventures in Wonderland. Many more lighthearted takes on Alice in Wonderland, especially those directly aimed at smaller children, tend to dumb down the Queen of Hearts quite a lot. In various versions, she's made to be a much more friendly character, and virtually doesn't resemble the original in any way at all. There are exceptions, of course, but this does seem to be the general case. Adventures in Wonderland is one of the few where I think they managed to hit a nice balance, making the Queen a more friendly and lighthearted character, but also still feeling like the Queen we recognize in a lot of ways. Played by the late, and I must add fittingly named, Armelia McQueen, the Queen in this series isn't evil at all. Any references to the offing of heads, and there are precious few to be found, seem to be strictly hyperbole. She generally considers the rest of the cast to be her friends, and at times is even a sort of matriarchal figure, acting as a sort of big sister to Alice and trying to rein the guys in line when they're acting up in a way neither approves of. However, while she may not be the villain, the Queen is still usually a character in the wrong. She's still bad-tempered, still childish, still frequently self-absorbed, and as a result is often the cause of conflict. From planning to cut down a critically endangered plant species, to trying to cancel the Wonderland equivalent of Thanksgiving, to accidentally polluting the drinking water supply with her own bubble bath mix, the Queen was still usually the antagonist. By the end of these episodes, she'd either have to learn a lesson or would end up eating crow in some way, or even a bit of both. If there was anyone more dangerously selfish than the Queen, it was her rival, the Duchess. Played by Terry Garr, this version of the Duchess was a recurring antagonist, who always seemed to be trying to one-up Her Majesty in some way. The great difference between them was that while the Queen would typically learn from her mistakes, the Duchess almost never seemed to do the same. I guess that's why one of them was always in a higher place on the Wonderland power totem pole. Number 5, Kathy Bates from Sci-Fi's Alice. In this 2009 miniseries, directed by Nick Willing, who also directed the aforementioned Hallmark movie 10 years before, the Queen rules Wonderland through a program of instant gratification. Her henchmen kidnap people from Earth and bring them to Wonderland. These people are referred to as oysters and are experimented on by the walrus and the carpenter, the leaders of her elite science organization. The reason they are called oysters is because these people are drained of many of their emotions, their, quote, shiny little pearls. These emotions are sold across Wonderland as teas, keeping the people in check by giving them everything they could want, and thus making them willing to participate in anything the Queen commands, no matter how heinous. While many of the characters are radically changed from the original stories, what's interesting is that the Queen of Hearts is actually one of the few who feels pretty darn close to her usual form. Her plans are different, the aesthetics are different, but her actual personality is basically the same. She's ruthlessly cruel, but also petulant, vain, impulsive, and at times a bit childish or gullible. She generally runs the gamut from being truly menacing and even downright creepy to really fun and amusing to watch. A big part of what makes her work, of course, is the actress playing her. This is probably my favorite performance by Kathy Bates, which is saying a lot. I don't think I really need to explain what makes her possibly one of the best casting choices ever in the role, to be honest. Frankly, some of her past work probably speaks for itself. Off with his legs! Number 4, Helena Bonham Carter from the Tim Burton version. Much like Johnny Depp's Mad Hatter, naming this version as one of my top 10 is likely going to be controversial, but I'm sticking to it. I'm also once again specifically focusing on her appearance in the first movie, since again, much like with Depp, I feel Carter's work in the second film is somewhat lacking, though how much of that is due to her, the script, or the direction is hard to say. Even there she has her moments, to be fair. Named Erasabeth in this version, the Queen has conquered the land after staging a coup against her sister, Mirana, the White Queen, aided by the monstrous Jabberwocky. However, a prophecy has foretold that a girl named Alice, who visited their world before in her youth, will return and slay the Jabberwocky, allowing the White Queen and her followers to take back the throne. Naturally, Erasabeth doesn't want this to happen, and sends her minions out to find Alice and her allies before the prophecy can be fulfilled. It's a pretty standard sort of plot overall, but I generally do still like this movie despite its flaws, and I really do enjoy Carter's take on the Queen. Not only is her design fun, probably my favorite film design of the Queen since the Hallmark version, but Carter once again manages to mingle humor and menace into the character, and even gives her a bit of a sad side. In both films, it's indicated that Erasabeth's rage and villainy largely is a result of her feeling unappreciated and unloved as a child, because Mirana seemed to be the favored one. All she really wants is for someone to truly care about her. But when you combine her childish gullibility with her cruel temper, it's understandable why it's hard for so many to do so. Even those closest to her all either fear her or pretend to love and respect her for their own self-advancement, or, more often, both. I can understand people not caring for Johnny Depp's Mad Hatter or Mia Wasikowska's Alice, even though I personally like them both. But I think that Helena Bonham Carter's Queen is pretty solid no matter who you are. It's a spot-on portrayal, especially compared to some of the other characters. She's still more than deserving of placement in my personal top 5. Number 3. Karen Mason from Frank Wildhorn's Wonderland. Mason's Queen is a bit different from all the others I've talked about here. She's not really a friendly character overall, like the one played by Armelia McQueen, but neither is she an out-and-out villain like most of the others here. Instead, she's depicted more as a neutral force. As I said in a past review of the Broadway version of this musical, Mason described the Queen as someone who, and I paraphrase here, doesn't think at all, she simply feels. The Queen isn't very bright, but she has a very powerful emotional core. If you can outsmart her and get on her good side, she can actually be very kind, helpful, and rewarding. As soon as she thinks you're a problem, though, well, she's still the Queen of Hearts. You can guess what happens. I love how Wildhorn's Queen is such a giddy, eccentric, flamboyant character. Instead of a raging monster, she's more like an airheaded, glamorous movie star who is so wrapped up in her own adulation she can't always see past it. That's both what makes her dangerous, but also a lot of fun. Once again, a couple of other people have played the Queen in other productions of this show, but I personally love Mason's version the most. A lot of the role was apparently written specifically with her in mind, and as a result, it feels like there's a lot of who she is strongly embedded in the character. It's a unique and really delightful twist on the Queen. Number 2. Aunt Red from The Looking Glass Wars. In the universe of Frank Better's The Looking Glass Wars, imagination itself is treated sort of being like the Force from Star Wars, at least in layman's terms. An invisible power which certain people can tap into in order to make incredible things happen. And much like the Force, just as there is a light side, there must also be a dark side. There is no more terrifying a practitioner of what they call black imagination in this world than Red Heart, sometimes referred to with ironic endearment as Aunt Red, the main antagonist of the novel trilogy and its spin-offs. In a way, Red reminds me of Kathy Bates's Queen. Just like the sci-fi version, while many of the other Wonderland characters in this world are intentionally meant to be completely different from the ones we know in the original story, Red is more or less on the money as the Queen of Hearts character. Like the original Queen, she's impulsive, ferocious, and at times very childish, and has a penchant for offing people's heads for even the pettiest of reasons. Also, much like the original Queen, while she can be a genuine menace, she can also be very entertaining and funny, usually due to her having a dark sense of humor all her own. One of my favorite moments for her occurs early in the first book, when Red hears a subject call her Your Imperial Viciousness. She's so taken with the moniker, she declares that will be her title from here on out, and anybody who doesn't call her that will die. She then turns to one of her card guards, who answers, "Yes, Your Majesty," and is immediately killed for the mistake. Naturally, the next guard she talks to is quick to use the proper honorific. Moments like that where her gleeful villainy and spitefulness lead to morbidly hilarious bits are peppered throughout the books. Red is also given a bit of a sympathetic side, which becomes more clear as the books go on. While she is the arch nemesis of her niece, Alice Hart, she is willing to work with Alice when it comes to taking down villains arguably even more terrible than herself. It's also revealed in her backstory that, much like Erasabeth from the Tim Burton version, Red's descent into darkness was largely the result of her feeling unappreciated by the rest of her family. I should note that the books predate both the Tim Burton movie and the aforementioned sci-fi miniseries by a good few years. With all that said, while she can be humorous and has her tragic side to her, Red is still a pretty nasty piece of work. Her powers allow her to summon pretty much any terrible and monstrous thing she wants just by willing it, from killer plants to deadly weapons. Absolutely no one is safe from her ire. Not her allies, and certainly not her own family. Cross her at your own peril. And my number 1 is the Disney version. Disney's Queen was originally voiced by Verna Felton, a very versatile actress who played multiple characters throughout Disney's history, including the fairy godmother from Cinderella, Flora the Good Fairy from Sleeping Beauty, and both Mrs. Jumbo and the elephant matriarch from Dumbo, just to name a few. Of all her performances, her work as the Queen of Hearts is by far my favorite. Not just because I'm such a sucker for the character and the story of Alice, mind you, but because this role gave her such a wide range to play with, due to the way the Queen was directed and written. This is yet another case where I think the Disney version really set the standard for a lot of later takes on the character. In the book, the Queen is pretty much always in a permanent state of cantankerous rage, but in the Disney version she's much more unpredictable. At times, she can almost seem like a loving and maternal person towards Alice and others. She has a sweet side to her, as long as things are going her way. But as soon as things aren't going the way she wants, she explodes. She's like a walking, ticking time bomb or volcano. You just never know when she's going to burst and erupt into a bellowing state of fury. And anytime the fury flies out of her, heads are almost guaranteed to roll. Felton not only voiced the character, but also provided at least some of the live-action reference for the animators who made the movie behind the scenes. The Queen remains a mainstay in the Disney villains' core lineup, despite having a relatively small amount of screen time. Like in the book, she doesn't really show up till the last third or so of the picture, but once she arrives, she steals the show. While other versions of the Queen may be more menacing or have more screen time, this is the one I think of foremost when I think of the Queen of Hearts in general. I love the dichotomy of her personality and the way it's pulled off. She's one of my favorite Disney villains of all time for a reason, and more than worthy of being awarded the title of my favorite Queen of Hearts. And thus concludes another episode of Analysis in Wonderland. I do plan to get at least one more episode done this year, possibly 2 if I can manage it, but I make no promises. What other wonders await you down the rabbit hole? Join me next time to find out. This is JJ Hatter, and never forget, we're all mad here.